Hey guys, welcome back to Release the Craftin. Priscilla here with day 6 of the Haunted Tales Challenge, which is the challenge that I'm hosting along with my good friend Belle over at Bellaboo Creations. So check her out. Check out the playlist in the description box below. See what everybody else is making. See the intro. See the stories. All the things that are down there for your viewing pleasure. And yeah, like I said, don't forget to check out Belle so you can see what she did for this challenge. And she is my co-host, so make sure you jump over there as well. And today, you'll see that we are immediately in sped up mode. I'm apologizing, I guess, kind of, for that. I'm not really apologizing. I have hit the wall of fatigue that is my chronic fatigue. And so I was very, very tired making this stuff, and I just was not capable of being, like, present enough to talk and craft at the same time. So I crafted and then came back when I had a couple more spoons of energy to do this voiceover for you guys. So for day 6, the prompt is Rebecca by Daphne de Maurier. Maurier? Ooh, my French viewers are going to hate me. I can't pronounce anybody's name in French. So, at any rate, wait. Words are really hard, and I'm already off to a great start. At any rate, Rebecca is the last of my picks for this challenge. Tomorrow we're doing Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. That was Belle's pick. But I picked Rebecca, and I'm excited to do Rebecca. You know, I actually saw this as a movie first. I saw the movie in 1940. It's the Alfred Hitchcock film. I think it's Laurence Olivier is the one who's in it. I saw the movie first because we had actually done a performance of this, a stage performance of this story in high school, and I was the stage manager for it. So our drama teacher was the one who showed it to us in class, and then, you know, then he was like, auditions are open for Rebecca, and I was like, I would like to be the director, and he was like, you cannot be the director, but you can be the stage manager, which is how I ended up there. So yeah, I stage managed a play version of this story in high school, so I happen to really enjoy this story because I can list it on my achievements of things that I did in high school. At any rate, I actually really like this story. It's actually one of the more modern stories of the list of stories that were given, I think. The movie came out in 1940. I think she wrote it in the 30s. And it's about the 30s. I believe that I have that correct. And essentially, it's the story of a young woman who gets recently married to this man who is also recently widowed, and she moves into his lavish mansion because he is filthy rich, and she is being, like, basically haunted by the lingering presence of his late wife. And it's a really interesting, like, deep dive into how, like, the dead linger after they're gone, how you can't really, like, erase the memory of a person because there's always going to be some little bit of them left behind, how we deal with grief, and how we process loss, and also having to deal with the character of the people that might not have been so savory after the fact. And I really love this story. It's not necessarily a ghost story, it's more psychological, more I wouldn't say it's like a thriller, but it's kind of along that way. But there is, like, a ghost in the story. The ghost is Rebecca, and it's very prevalent from, like, the beginning, that Rebecca is the ghost that's haunting everybody in this story. Not just, like, the house, but all the people in it, all the people around this house in association with. Rebecca is haunting them, even though she's actually not in the book. And that's not a spoiler. She's the ghost. She's the late wife. So, this story is interesting to me, and I've made a connection, a parallel to it, that I'm going to talk about at the end, or closer to the end. I'll let you guys know, because it is a major spoiler. If I tell you what my connection is, you're going to know how the story ends, or have a very good idea of what happens at the ending. So, I'll push that towards the end of this conversation. But once I made this connection, I kind of love this story a little bit more. So, like, I want to share it with you guys because it has a storycraft connection. That's the only hint I'm going to give you right now. But this story is crazy to me for a couple of things. There's a couple of different interesting things that happen in this story. And I guess, as per usual, I will tell you as much of the story as I can without spoiling the ending of the story in case you do want to go, like, read it or go watch the movie. I would definitely recommend Alfred Hitchcock's version. It was fantastic. There's actually quite a few versions of Rebecca in film. So if you aren't interested in listening to the audiobook or reading the book, I would recommend watching one of the movies. I think there's even, like, a recent Netflix one. I think because I went to go search to make sure that I had the right director, and the Netflix one came up first, and I was like, how dare you? So it's out there. I don't know, I've never seen it. It could be really, really good. I don't know. But I am in a personal war with Netflix, so I don't like when they recommend me their stuff. At any rate, the story opens up, and it's sort of a crazy opening because our narrator, who I don't believe we get told her name in the beginning. I can't remember. All I remember is that they all refer to her as, like, the Lady de Winter as the story goes on. I'm trying to remember what her first name was, and it's just not coming through. So, skip. At any rate, she's not actually the Lady de Winter in the beginning of the book. She's actually a single woman who is traveling with an older woman. I should have looked that up too, because it's been a minute since I've read this, but I can't remember if they're friends or if she's hired to work for her. I think she's hired to work for her, and she's, like, out there taking care of her, but, like, they're also kind of buddies, you know, so they're traveling together. I feel like that's the dynamic. But she's traveling with this older woman, and they're basically just doing, like, a tour of things, and they are currently in Monte Carlo. And they are going to be there for, like, a week, and then they're going to fly back to the States, and it's, like, kind of a whole thing. And so while she's there, the lady points out to her, she's like, oh, that's Maxim de Winter. He's this super rich dude from England, and everybody knows him, and he's, like, fabulously wealthy, and he's old money, and, like, blah, blah, blah. And, like, you know, everybody knows this guy. He's stinking rich. And, she's like, oh, yeah, also he's recently widowed because his wife died a year ago, and he had to identify the body, so there's all this gossip, right? And, she ends up, like, talking to Maxim, and they sort of spend that whole week together, like, hanging out, flirting, having little dates and stuff, and it's really cute. It's like a little meet cute, right? But what happens is that the week ends, right, and she's supposed to move on to the next leg of the trip, and so she goes to, like, say goodbye to him, and she's like, hey, you know, this has been really lovely, like, it's been great to see you, but I do have to continue on with the rest of my life and this trip, so, like, I gotta go. Maybe we can still keep in touch. And then he just looks right at her, and he's like, you don't want to go. You don't want to leave. You want to come back with me to Manderley as my wife. And he just says that to her, like, bold as brass. Just tells her, this is what you want. You want to marry me and be my wife and come back to Manderley. Manderley is his home in Cornwall. And she hears this, and instead of, like, clocking it as the red flag that it is, she's like, starts to imagine herself as the Lady de Winter. She's like, maybe I do, like, I kind of do have feelings for this guy. Maybe I am a little bit in love with this guy, even though it's only been, like, a week. And maybe I, like, want to be the fancy Lady de Winter, and I can have everyone be, like, referring to me as the Lady de Winter, and being like, oh, that's Maxim's wife, and I'm living in high society now, and, you know, she starts to imagine, like, these scenarios where she can use her newfound wealth to be, like, generous to poor old women and stuff like that, and be like, oh, if you need anything, just come to the house and I'll help you. I'm the Lady de Winter. So she's having this, like, sort of fantasy about being Maxim's wife, and she gets sort of caught up with that, and then she does it. She goes back and she marries Maxim, and they move into his house in the house of Manderley, and while there, she ends up meeting his housekeeper, which is Mrs. Danvers, and she starts to realize that the death of Rebecca, the previous Lady de Winter, is still very present and, like, obvious, because her, like, her essence, I guess, for lack of a better word, is all over the house. Her presence is everywhere, and it's a little bit overwhelming because she's trying to adjust to this, like, new life. She's living in high society. You know, she's moved up in, like, the class system there dramatically. You know, now she's, like, a wealthy woman, so she has to act like it, and she has to learn the ropes, and the whole time, all she's hearing about is freaking Rebecca. You know, so she can't even, like, get her own footing in this house as the new wife, because everything comes like around to Rebecca. It always comes back to Rebecca. And even as she's like going around the house and she's finding these things, she's finding stuff that used to be Rebecca's. And like the presence of Rebecca is so heavy that it's sort of eclipsing her own presence. Like she's there, she's the new wife, she should be like the focus of things, but people keep bringing up Rebecca, particularly Mrs. Danvers, who brings her up with like a lot of reverence, a lot of awe, and she's just like, Rebecca was so great, Rebecca was so wonderful. Like she's Rebecca's biggest hype person. And you will also find that she is the new Lady de Winter's biggest op. Mrs. Danvers is not her friend, and it's very present and obvious to begin with, because she absolutely loves Rebecca and cannot get over the fact that Rebecca's not there, will not let it go, and she doesn't care that like Maxim has a new wife and is starting a new life. She's actually a little bit resentful of it, because nobody could be better than her bestie Rebecca, right? And it sort of goes on through the story that you start to learn about the character of Rebecca as well. Like it's not just like her stuff and like things like that are hanging around. It's like her character starts to get slowly brought up the more people she talks to, the more she interacts with stuff, where it's sort of a little bit implied that like the great Rebecca maybe wasn't so great after all, and she may have been actually pretty dang awful. And there's a really interesting like thread through this story, in the way that our narrator is classified versus how Rebecca is classified, and how these standards that are placed on women sort of dictate how we're supposed to perceive them, right? Because in this story, our narrator takes sort of the place of the young ingenue. She is, she's young. She's very young. She's actually half Maxim's age, if that makes it more icky to you. The red flags were red flagging, because she's 20 and Maxim is in his 40s. I think she's like 22 maybe. And she is young, she is inexperienced, she is, she's the ingenue, she's innocent, she's not very worldly, she comes from sort of a poor upbringing, so this is like a big thing for her to move up in the world, and she's not familiar with these sort of things, so she's acting from a place of like compassion and kindness and sweetness, because those are the things that she's familiar with. And we're told in the course of the story that our narrator is an innocent young woman of virtue, and therefore she is the better option in comparison to Rebecca, who is illustrated throughout the course of the story as a person with a tempestuous nature. She has fits of anger, and she kind of is a sort of uncontrollable creature. She's a woman. So she's an uncontrollable person who is also very sexually promiscuous. And it's implied that she'd be hooking up everywhere. Every time she would go to London, she'd be getting into dirty business, right? Hooking up, doing all these things. And there's even some undertones, which shouldn't come as a surprise if you have been following along this challenge at any point. There's some sapphic undertones here that she may have been hooking up with Mrs. Danvers as well. And that's why Mrs. Danvers was so down bad for her, because that wasn't her bestie, that was her girlfriend. So like, there's a lot here to sort of show you that Rebecca was not conforming with what was expected of women at the time. She wasn't conforming to that purity standard. She was being her own person, doing her own thing. And it's not to say that like her husband wasn't also doing his own thing, but he's not the subject of exploration here. It's her. And the fact that she is choosing to do her own thing in this regard makes people, or makes the opinion of her a little bit negative. You're sort of led to believe as the reader that she's sort of unredeemable because of these negative qualities, whereas the replacement wife is the better option. She is redeemable. She is a good person because she's innocent and sweet and is conforming to this standard. And it's a really interesting discourse in how like we view women, the lens in which we view women, and what women are allowed to do and not allowed to do, because they're not allowed to be sexual creatures even today. today, women are dealing with that sort of negative backlash of being a person in charge of their own sexuality. And people want women to be agreeable. They want them to be quiet. They want them to fit in this sort of box. And when you don't fit in that box, people treat you like you're very difficult. And this is something that, like, I can say, I mean, I'm pretty sure we all have, like, personal experience with this as women or people who identify as such. Because my own personal experience with this really came from the way in which I let my previous job sort of determine how I viewed myself, because I thought, like, here I am speaking out, being like, hey, this isn't physically possible in the position that you've put me in with the resources I have. And I would speak up about it and be like, hey, that's not going to happen. I can't do that. That's not possible. You won't pay me overtime, so therefore I can't stay to do all this extra work you suddenly want me to do. Or, like, it's just not, like, something reasonable. And I would constantly be in these, like, battles with my manager and my upper management and stuff like that, where I was like, man, I must be, like, a raging bitch, because it got to the point where, like, these men were all trying to tell me about myself and, like, about the work that I'm doing, the only person who's doing it, the only person who's responsible for it, and then the only person who's responsible if it fails. And then they would get to the point where, like, they wouldn't even come talk to me directly anymore. They would talk to my manager, so that my manager would funnel the information through me, like, through him to me, so that they wouldn't have to confront me and deal with the facts. And then, if something went wrong, I'd be like, see how I told you that this didn't happen? Like, this wasn't going to work the way that you thought it was. And now we're throwing away hundreds of dollars in product, which is costing my department money, which you are then going to ask me about later at a certain point in time. And so, like, because of the way that, like, all these men started to act when it came to interacting with me, I started to, like, really believe, like, I was a bitch. And they even told me, not, like, directly, like, hey, you're a bitch, but they were like, she's really bossy and she's really such and such. And I was like, maybe I am, like, maybe that's how it is. And then I left that environment and started working with a bunch of women and was like, you know what, I'm not a bitch at all. Not, like, in the way that they were thinking. I mean, I'm kind of a bitch, but, like, not like that. And I'm actually not, like, this bitter, angry person anyways. I'm out here fighting for my life in this grocery store, which is why I've turned out this way. But, like, once that toxic element got removed, I was totally chill. And I had no problems, and everything was good as gravy, and nobody thinks that I'm, like, a raging bitch anymore. And I was like, oh, hold on a minute. So the only difference was that instead of being like some of the other girls that I worked with at that grocery store, who were just, like, yes man and, like, yes sirring their way through the whole process, I spoke up. And because I was speaking up and speaking out and being like, here's some facts to, like, correct your incorrect opinion of what we should do in my department, I got this label on me as being, like, a really difficult person. And that's not the case. I just know my shit. So, like, it's something that I think a lot of us experience in a lot of different ways. Maybe not so openly aggressively as it was at my workplace, but, like, it's really interesting that it comes up in this story, because, like, you can read the story one way and be like, oh yeah, Rebecca was a bitch and she was kind of, like, all over there and she was a cheater and she was awful and horrible. But then, like, if you shift the lens a little bit and you sort of, like, widen the perspective and be like, well, what the fuck was Maxim doing the whole time, and how come it was like that, and, like, what was their dynamic like, and, like, you start to, like, dig into that and be like, well, what's the bigger picture here that I'm not seeing? I start to get a little more sympathetic towards, like, Rebecca's cause. Obviously, I'm a big supporter of women's rights and their wrongs. So, for me, I don't view Rebecca as this evil woman so much as I view her as a woman who just refused to be, like, contained by the prison of marriage and her husband's, like, expectations for her. And you kind of get the impression as the story goes on that really is the issue, is that she wasn't letting herself be sort of boxed in by the expectations that everybody else had for her, which led to men sort of resenting her, and unless they were in love with her, then they really didn't resent her, or women being head over heels for her, like Mrs. Danvers was. So, like, that sort of happens through the story. It's a really interesting look at it. There's a lot to say. I believe that why is my brain stopping? Daphne, the author, sorry, that took a second, was a bisexual woman. So she also sort of lived a life very similar to Rebecca. Maybe not necessarily exactly the same, but there's a lot of things that I think are parallels from her lived experience to what happens in this story. And whatchamacallit, I don't want to spoil the ending. So I guess I'll talk about what I did on the pages here. So I was going for a, like, look at the old wife versus the new wife thing, because there is a portrait of Rebecca that becomes very, like, relevant in the story, because she's wearing this dress, and, like, our narrator doesn't know that picture, like the portrait that's hung up, is Rebecca. She's never seen Rebecca before, so she has no reason to believe that. But Mrs. Danvers, in an example of how she is the biggest op, tells her, like, hey, there's a big party coming up. You guys are hosting this big banquet. Why don't you get that dress from the portrait made so that you can wear it to this party? It'll be like a big thing, because everyone will see that you're wearing that beautiful dress and be like, oh, how beautiful. And she's matching the portrait. So, like, she does that. She gets the dress made. She shows up to the banquet. She shows up late because she wants to, like, make an entrance, and as you know, the first appearance of the Lady de Winter, the new Lady de Winter. And when she gets there, Maxim's like, go back upstairs, get the fuck out of here, how dare you, you're making a fool of yourself, like, blah blah blah. And then as she walks upstairs, she kind of sees Miss Danvers smiling at her with that little, like, self-satisfied smirk, because the portrait was of Rebecca, and the dress was her dress. So she showed up wearing the dress of the late wife to a new banquet as the new wife, which was super gauche and embarrassing. And it's one of the things that, like, the narrator is worried about. She doesn't want to seem gaudy or gauche. She wants to seem like this high society woman that she has suddenly found herself as, and she's worried that she won't be because she's young and inexperienced. And she just did it. She committed a huge faux pas because she trusted Miss Danvers, and this is sort of when she realizes that she can't trust Miss Danvers because Miss Danvers set her up to fail absolutely. So in the course of making my pages, I wanted to sort of illustrate with the, like, ghostly silhouettes, the lingering presence of Rebecca in the house. She doesn't show up like a ghost in the story. There's no, like, premonition or apparition. Sorry, not premonition. Apparition of her, like, lingering in places. But I wanted it to sort of get the vibe across in the pages that she's always sort of lingering, looming over the house. Her presence is always being felt there. But there's a course in the story where the narrator finds a jacket and realizes that in the jacket is a, like, handkerchief with some lipstick still on it, and it has the embroidered letter R, and just the letter R, and she realizes that the jacket belonged to Rebecca. It's one of the many things she keeps finding that belong to Rebecca that are still in the house, just still hanging out there. And now she's wearing this jacket that was Rebecca's, holding this handkerchief that was Rebecca's, and it's got Rebecca's lipstick on it. And she may have at some point put that up to her face and had the same face to face with Rebecca. That's how close Rebecca's presence is, and it's sort of devouring her. So I kind of wanted to get that across with how I was using the florals, as, like, they were taking over the pages. I did this, like, heat embossing of the R in a sort of powdery blue color so that it would be like a handkerchief, you know, sort of a callback to the handkerchief, because that's the things that were, like, left behind by Rebecca. I go back and I try to make sure everything is, like, gold and shiny, because of course this is rich and wealthy people doing rich and wealthy people things, and all while Rebecca's presence is lingering over the top of them. And eventually I'm going to bring out a stencil that has some faces and use that as well to be, like, Rebecca always around, always watching, her presence always felt, sort of lingering in the walls and the paper and in all sorts of aspects. She's just always there, always present, always watching. And how many minutes do I have left? Hold on, I'm looking at it to see what else I needed to talk about. Oh, I used the snake print to sort of illustrate that there's, like, you know, a snake in the grass, something that is sort of lingering there underneath the surface of everything, a sort of dark presence that may or may not be malevolent, something that is happening in the background without giving away the ending, that things aren't as they appear, and there's something sort of hanging in there behind this whole narrative that we've crafted around Rebecca and her legacy. There's something sort of ominous behind it, something a little bit darker, a little bit scarier that is sort of behind her. So that's what I did. I did this panel with the acetate and the vellum so that it's see-through, so you can actually, if you hold it up to the light, you see the house with the bones and Rebecca sort of hanging over it. But it's just sort of to show that there's something a little bit more under the surface here with this story. And now, onward and upward to my parallel. So I'm going to give you the parallel that I had, or the connection that I made, and you, if you don't want to know or be spoiled to the ending of the story, can dip away. Because when I tell you this, it is going to be a bit of a spoiler. I'm not going to tell you exactly how the story ends, so it'll still be a little bit mysterious. But once I tell you my connection, you're going to be like, oh, I know. Unless you don't know what I'm talking about, then at which point you won't be spoiled whatsoever. But this story is Bluebeard. It's Bluebeard. And I didn't realize that until recently, and I kind of love it a little bit more for the fact that it is Bluebeard, because it's Bluebeard with like a different take on it. Especially because there's sort of a redemptive quality at the end of this story in Rebecca that isn't present in Bluebeard, because in Bluebeard is evil, point blank, period. But in this one, it's sort of the reverse, where they're like, well, the women were bad, therefore it's okay that Bluebeard did a Bluebeard. And I think it's really interesting. I think it's a really interesting way to look at that story and sort of spin it a little bit, but I hadn't even considered that it was Bluebeard. And so if you don't know anything about Bluebeard and you don't want to be spoiled for this story, watch the movie or listen to the audiobook or read the book before you go look up Bluebeard. If you would like to know more about Bluebeard, because you don't care if this story gets spoiled, I did it on Storycraft. So that's in my playlist, in the Storycraft playlist on my channel. So you can find that there and hear the whole Bluebeard story and then be like, oh yeah. If you know about Rebecca but haven't heard about Bluebeard, that's also an option. Go look it up and then you'll be like, oh yeah, you're right. It is Bluebeard, but from a slightly different perspective. Because the way this story ends is crazy. It's wild. There's a twist. There's a fire. And then, like, they, how do I explain this? There's a sort of redemptive closure bit to this story that makes me, irrationally irate, because all the red flags were there on the table, and now that I've connected it to Bluebeard, I'm like, absolutely not. No, ma'am. Do not. And it's one of those stories now that is a little bit more frustrating in the ending to me. I always thought the ending was strange, but I also just kind of think that, like, Rebecca might be my spirit animal. You know, like, I think she was kind of a shit person, but she was in a shit situation because, oh, no, I don't want to say it because I don't want to ruin the story for you guys. But let's just say that, like, things weren't great when Rebecca was alive. And, yeah, I understand why things turned out the way that they did. And why she chose to live the life that she chose to live. And, again, I support women's rights and their wrongs. And so, yeah, I actually really like Rebecca. And I think she's being slandered. And maybe Mrs. Danvers is right. There's also, like a butler and a dude that may probably have been one of her lovers, who's like all like, no, my Rebecca would never, and my Rebecca was like this, and my Rebecca was like that. I don't really care. I didn't have time for this one to talk about them too much, so I didn't really pay that much attention to it. I will say there is something that I thought about recently, and it was sort of the parallels to Ophelia in art, not in literature. But there is a painting by John Everett Millais, I think is how you say it, where it has like Ophelia in the water, and I think that kind of comes through is like an echo in how the ending of Rebecca is. And then there's another version, which is a John William Waterhouse Ophelia, where she's sort of sitting by the water, just being a beautiful young woman, that I think is sort of a comparative to the narrator. And I think they're both interesting takes on how the story plays out between the narrator and Rebecca, with the sitting by the lake and then floating in the water. So that was just sort of the connection that I made artistically between the two women. But yeah, that's Rebecca, you guys. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. This was so hard to film without getting my entire face reflected in the acetate, but also to show you the acetate. My decision to use acetate was maybe ill-informed, but also some of the coolest stuff I've ever done, because it looks so good. I actually really like how this came out. I really enjoyed this one. But it was hell to record and not get my full face and everything. But also, I realized probably about this point when I'm doing the little flip through to show you guys what it looks like, is that I'm wearing a very low slung tank top, and I've mentioned it before. I am very chesty. So I was like, oh my god, what if you like fully flashed everybody trying to avoid getting your face in the shot and you just got your chest in the shot? So if you guys see it, don't mention it. It's embarrassing enough already to consider the possibilities of. But I really hope I didn't. I don't think I saw it watching the playback for the voiceover, but just in caseies. Although you guys get to see my entire filming and lighting setup, which isn't fancy at all. I'm working on getting better lighting. It's more that I need to move my desk, is what it is. I need to move the desk so that the lighting will be better. So in the meantime, that's it for me, guys. Happy crafting and goodbye. Oh, check out the playlist. Check out everybody else tomorrow. # haunt your crafts. The things. I appreciate your faces. Goodbye.